Imagination about the inner body has always fascinated and frightened me. I honestly have to blame the programs on TV that ventured out exploring the human system. It felt fantastical, even adventurous, to enter these different realms of the brain, the stomach, the ear. While the Magic School Bus used it for educational purposes, other shows created exciting stories about entering Carl's brain from Jimmy Neutron, or in Futurama where Planet Express tried to remove the parasites inside Fry. There's quite a few tales about the human body, but barely a visit to the appendix. There was something about the appendix that was off-putting. Fellow students would be away for a week, then come back showing off this red line on the side of their belly. This extreme pain would be described as the biggest stomachache. The doctors called it appendicitis. I couldn't believe what kind of pain this was, but one day, the class screened that Madeline movie where she gets her appendix removed. Everyone stressing, including Miss Clavel, brewed a fear I hadn't felt before. Fear of it bursting, fear of running and getting a stitch. I never asked others about this part of us. Another day of class, and we're reading Sucked In, the ultimate answer to all my fears? Paul Jennings is an Australian author well-renowned down under for his gross-out, bizarre and outlandish stories, which could be considered downright uncanny, unreal, and sing-and-poo. You know his work is genius when it creates Round the Twist, a television series that celebrates his best short stories. A video discussion for another time perhaps. He's made memorable stories which have left me and many others admire his work. Sucked In is the tale of a teacher, Mr. Denton, creating a story for his class about a student named Trevor, whom had his appendix removed. Before his operation, done by doctors, who enjoy playing golf during work hours, he asks what they do with them after surgery. Burn them in an incinerator. Knowing this, Trevor wants to keep this part of him safely secured in a jar. Trevor wakes up, stitches across the belly. What was once inside is beside his bed. This connection with the self lets him say, "We must always be together." At home, the appendix is stored in the fridge overnight, and as Trevor attempts to sleep, his mum shrieks in horror, witnessing such a dreaded, lonesome pickle as she opens the fridge door. "I'm not having that revolting appendix in there." Trevor expresses that if she doesn't like the appendix, then she doesn't like him. The yellow liquid keeps the appendix preserved, regardless of being cold or not. He takes the jar upstairs and keeps it near his bedside. We must always be together. As night passes, a school day commences, and of course, it's time for show and tell. Wonder what Trevor would bring. Of course, the appendix in a jar is on full display for his peers and teacher to witness. The teacher, Mr. Birtle, has a rather bad feeling about this. In contrast to what an actual appendix looks like, he doesn't see what the kids believe. For what should look like a thick, short worm you'd find in the backyard, this creature is grey, similar to a sandworm, floating in the yellow jelly dregs. All the students are amazed and can't keep their eyes from it. Their first time witnessing an appendix. Stunned. Silent. Trevor is asked by Mr. Birtle to find an anatomy book in the library so they can all see what an appendix looks like. Trevor hesitates, walking out of the classroom. The appendix eddied and swirled slowly upon his departure. Trevor gets a throbbing headache out of nowhere, sweaty hands and a thumping heart. Both the appendix and Trevor start simultaneously swirling like angry goldfish in their different places. The classroom is starting to be concerned by the appendix. The jar rattles. Trevor yearns to return to that part of him. He launches for the anatomy book with force and makes his way back to the classroom. We must always be together. When Trevor returns, the appendix is still. Mr. Birtle tries to explain what happened, that it was moving. He tries an experiment, asking Trevor to leave the room for a moment. His headache begins again. Looking through the window, he starts to see his appendix freaking out in the jar. Everyone in the classroom is scared. This is not normal. Mr. Birtle tests the idea even further. Trevor is to cross the street and count to 20. The fever is worse than before. Sweat drips from his fingers. Legs are shaking. After hearing a scream from 30 children, he hovers back to the school. We must be together. He returns to a jar rattling with such a powerful force until Trevor embraces it and comes to a standstill. This is beyond anything for Mr. Birtle. He gets the principal. Trevor believes they are trying to separate them. The appendix bobs up and down. Was that a hallucination, or does this creature understand? The teacher and principal try to confiscate the appendix from the class, but it starts to erupt when the boy is taken away from it. The jar vibrates furiously. The appendix's anger thrives. Trevor also shakes furiously. The principal runs away with the appendix and starts to sweat as he drives off. It looks like a ticking time bomb. He puts it down on the side of the street, and as soon as he revs away, it explodes. It's free and decides to go on an ultra rampage. What could a small, alien-type appendix do to nature? Well, it can become a vacuum cleaner. Throughout the illustration, we have seen a dog chasing a cat and a cat chasing a rat. Out of order, the appendix sucks up the cat, the dog retaliates, barking at it, it slithers amok, turning into a classic monster of the week. What makes the situation more unsettling is that the appendix begins to imitate the animals, woofing and meowing and squeaking. Trevor manages to escape from Mr. Birtle and runs his way to the appendix. The appendix slithers down the drain knowing exactly where to go. To Trevor, his pain started to grow less. As he sat down on the gutter, it slithered up towards him. The appendix squeaked like a rat, crying to the master. We must always be together, Trevor says. Now, as I've gone across the story, I ended almost each paragraph with "we must always be together." It's a vital part of the story. The wordplay is great here, and the imagination for this one is gross. Trevor swallows his appendix, becoming whole again. It's amazingly disgusting, such a slimy, gross outcome. But it isn't over. While Mr. Denton finishes his tale, a student asks during lunch about an error in the story. If Trevor swallowed the appendix, then why is it still here? He goes off to lunch, and the curious student opens up the jar. The appendix slowly hovers above and says, "We must always be together." She drops the jar and runs out of the classroom. So that is Sucked In. It's scary in the way that you interpret it. Some could consider it more gross out for kids. Speaking of which, the appendix is gross as heck, probably the best word for it. And the idea of it having this gaping mouth the whole time with a bottomless stomach is a brilliant visual. You would hate to see it appear in real life. Yet the idea of something that was a part of you becoming a monster stirs an internal fear. It's quite a disturbing aspect of this live appendix having a connection with Trevor, and them being separated results in a cataclysm of the self. My interpretation of their separation was that Trevor, despite having an operation, is still inflicted with appendicitis, and that the appendix is using it as an abusive sense of control, not wanting to be apart. The illustrations were done by Terry Denton and are always amazing. From my visual interpretation, it's black pen outlines with a flourishing, rich watercolor paint. It keeps the story from being too dark for children, adding a flair of comedy and highly expressive characters who you find in the background and the objects in the classrooms and shops. It doesn't try to be clean, and his style is always fun, giving a lot of freedom on the page. Especially the off-brand Homer Simpsons and Daffy Duck. Paul Jennings made a story that honestly stuck with me when I was growing up. It's one of his best short stories and dove into that fear of something inside us and writing a wild outcome. Something so out there that we could be duped into believing such a thing or realizing appendicitis treatment isn't so bad. I personally haven't had appendicitis. It's honestly a horrible thing to have from what I've heard, causing pain as you walk and later on containing symptoms such as chills, diarrhea, fever, etc. And it's crazy, as the appendix is a part of the body that keeps us immune from diseases. But for anyone that does, know that all will be well, because it's not going to swallow you whole.